Hey everyone, before we start, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy real stories that stick with you long after the video ends. And if you've ever driven down a lonely road at night and felt like something was watching you, tell me about it in the comments. I always read those. Now, this one is different. I don't usually talk about my years with the sheriff's office. In fact, I've spent a long time trying to forget most of it. But lately, I keep waking up in the middle of the night thinking about the one case, if you can even call it a case, that still clings to me like swamp mud on boots. A lot of people say Florida is nothing but beaches and tourists and theme parks. But let me tell you, northern Florida is a whole different world. My name is Jacob Hale. I used to be a deputy with the Suwannee County Sheriff's Office. I only worked there for 5 years, but it felt like a lifetime. I left the department 2 years ago. Some people think they know why. They say I burned out. They say I couldn't handle the hours. Others say I had some kind of breakdown. The department never gave an official reason, and neither did I. But the truth is worse than all those stories. I'm finally talking about it now because keeping quiet hasn't helped. I thought pushing the memories down would make them fade, but instead they crawl back up every night, piece by piece. Maybe saying it out loud. Finally telling someone will help me understand what happened. Or maybe it'll just warn someone else who ends up alone on those back roads. Suwannee County isn't big. It's a patchwork of pine forests, old farms, river bends, and tiny towns that people drive past without noticing. You'll see more cows than people, and more open sky than buildings. It's the kind of place folks describe as quiet in a good way, but also in a bad way. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. The kind of quiet where you feel like someone else is listening to. The first time I drove through the county, long before I wore a badge there, I remember thinking the land looked frozen in time. There were shuttered motels whose neon signs hadn't worked in 20 years. Gas stations with peeling paint. Old fishing shops with rusted hooks still hanging on windows. And dirt roads that twisted off in the woods like they were trying to hide from something. But the strangest thing was how everything felt hollow. Like a place built for more people than it ever saw. Like the towns were waiting for someone who was never coming back. Locals don't talk about the county's past. Trust me, I tried asking more than once. The most I ever got was a shrug or a quiet, best you leave old stories alone. And soon after I joined the sheriff's office, I understood why. There are pieces of history here that are better left buried under the roots and mud. My new patrol area, back when all this started, covered a long stretch of County Road 349, a mostly empty road that cut to the woods near some abandoned farmland. The land was flat and open in some places and tight and shadowed in others, where pine trees leaned over the road and blocked out the sky. There was an old fishing lake out there too, Hatcher Lake, but it had dried up years before I arrived. Locals said the lake died one summer and never came back, like the land just decided it was done with water. Now it was nothing but cracked dirt and little patches of stubborn weeds. I started working that sector during my second year on the force. Back then, I was still eager, still proud of the badge, still believed the county was just another quiet place where nothing ever happened. But the deputies who'd been there longer than me didn't share that attitude. I remember sitting in the break room listening to two of the older guys talk about the 349 sector like it was cursed land. Nothing good ever happens out there. One of them had said, "Place makes your skin crawl." They noticed me listening and stopped talking right away. That happened a lot during my first year. Quiet conversations ending the moment I stepped into the room. I figured it was just hazing. Every department had its own way of messing with new guys. I didn't think it meant something more. Not yet. My first solo patrol shift on 349 was a late one. Started at 6 p.m., ended at 6 a.m. Florida nights are different in the woods. They don't cool down. The air gets heavier, thicker, like a blanket that suffocates instead of comforts. You hear frogs, insects, the occasional splash from some animal moving through shallow water, and sometimes you hear nothing at all. That kind of silence can make a man uneasy, even an armed man. I remember the way my patrol car hummed under me as I drove past the dried lake. The radio crackled now and then with small calls from other deputies. Traffic stop here, loose livestock there. But nothing unusual. Nothing that should have made my hands tighten on the wheel the way they did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I know how that sounds. I know people think cops don't get scared on night patrols. But that's a lie. We're human. We just learn how to swallow it. Around midnight, I pulled onto a narrow dirt road near the tree line. There was an old barbed wire fence there, half fallen over, marking the edge of one of the abandoned farms. The moon hung low behind the clouds, giving everything a pale glow. I parked the car, left the engine running, and stepped out to stretch my legs. The smell of pine and old soil filled the air. A soft wind moved through the trees. I was noting the quiet when something caught my eye. A figure, standing at the edge of the tree line. Still, too still. I froze. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a trespasser or some kid trying to scare me. They were tall enough to be an adult. I could see the shape of their shoulders, their head, their arms resting at their sides. But something about the posture fell off. The silhouette was too stiff, like whoever was didn't understand how to stand like a normal person. Sheriff's office. I called out, keeping my voice steady. You all right? No answer. No movement. I reached for my flashlight and aimed it at the figure. The beam cut through the dark, and the figure vanished. Not walked away. Not ducked. Not ran. Just wasn't there anymore. My heart thudded so hard I thought I'd feel it crack. I swept the flashlight across the trees, the grass, the dirt. Nothing. No footprints, no sound, no sign anyone had ever been there. I stood there for a good minute trying to steady my breathing. Nights can play tricks on you, especially in the woods. Light bends in strange ways. Shadows shift. Your mind fills in details that aren't real. That's what I told myself. But a small part of me, deep down, didn't believe it. I got back in the patrol car and locked the doors out of pure reflex. My hands were shaking a little, and I hoped no one was around to see it. I put the car in drive and continued down the road, telling myself over and over, it was nothing, probably a tree stump, a shadow, a trick of the moonlight. But stumps don't disappear, and shadows don't stand still at the edge of the trees like they're waiting for you. I drove slower than usual the rest of the shift. Every time the wind rustled the pine needles, I jumped inside. At one point, I even turned the radio off because I couldn't handle the static. I kept checking the rear view mirror, convinced I'd see that figure sitting in the back seat or walking along the road behind me. It was stupid, irrational. I knew better, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Around 4 a.m., still 2 hours before my shift ended, I pulled into a small boat ramp parking lot near the Suwannee River. The ramp didn't serve much purpose anymore since the water had receded so far over the years, but it was close to the main road and well lit. I parked there just to breathe for a bit. The water moved slow and dark under the moonlight. Cypress trees leaned over the river with roots like bony fingers. Even the river seemed quieter than usual. After a few minutes, I started to relax. I even laughed at myself for getting so worked up. I'd seen shadows before. Everyone in law enforcement has a moment like that. The woods can do weird things to a man's head if he's tired. I reminded myself that I had a long shift and a long week ahead. But even after calming down, I kept glancing toward the tree line, half expecting to see someone standing there. When my shift finally ended, I drove home with the windows cracked, letting the early morning air cool me down. The sun wasn't up yet. The sky still looked bruised and heavy. But the entire drive home from the county line to my neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind me, not following my car, not chasing me, just watching, like a pair of eyes had fixed on me and refused to let go. I kept checking the mirror over and over, and every time my stomach tightened. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long minute before going inside. The house felt too quiet, the way empty places feel when you get home after a long night. I couldn't tell if I was exhausted or scared or just imagining the whole thing. Maybe it was all three. I told myself I'd forget about it by the next shift. I told myself it was nothing. Just nerves. Just shadows. Just the woods doing what woods do. But deep down, in that small part of me I tried so hard to ignore, I knew it wasn't nothing. And I knew it wasn't a person, either. I didn't sleep well that morning. Every time I started drifting off, I saw that figure standing perfectly still at the tree line. And every time I blinked, it was gone again, leaving nothing but the memory of how wrong its shape looked. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought it was a one-time thing, just a strange moment on a long shift. But I had no idea what was coming next, because that figure, that silent shape in the dark, was only the beginning. And the real horror didn't start until phone calls came. I didn't get much sleep after that first night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that unmoving figure at the tree line, tall, stiff, wrong. By the time my next shift rolled around, I had convinced myself that I was making too big a deal of it. Knew deputies get spooked all the time. The woods play tricks. My nerves were raw. That's what I kept repeating as I drove back toward County Road 349. But the truth didn't care what I told myself. 2 nights after the sighting, I was sipping burnt coffee from the station pot when dispatch radioed in. Unit 4, we're getting a report of possible screams near Hatcher Farm. Can you check it out? I frowned. Hatcher Farm had been abandoned since the early 1990s. I'd passed the place during patrols. There wasn't much left except a collapsed barn, an empty field, and a few rotting fence posts half swallowed by weeds. Who called it in? I asked. Dispatch hesitated. Shows as unknown caller. No callback number. I waited for more. Nothing came. That wasn't normal. But I acknowledged the call and headed toward the farm. Night had just settled in, laying a heavy dark blanket across the trees. When I reached the old dirt driveway, the place looked even sadder than usual. Moonlight hit the farmhouse roof, which sagged like a broken spine. I radioed in my arrival. Dispatch, Unit 4. I'm on site. No obvious movement. Copy, Unit 4. Use caution. The wind shifted, brushing the grass in soft waves. I listened carefully, expecting, I don't know what, a scream, a voice, something. But all I heard was the steady hum of crickets. I walked toward the barn, flashlight sweeping across warped boards and rusted tools. The place was dead, completely still. I was about to call it clear when the radio buzzed again. Unit 4, same caller reported more screams. Said they came from a field behind the barn. I stopped moving. Dispatch, how recent? Just now. Just now. Meaning someone was watching the place at this very moment, or pretending to. I took a slow breath. Do we have a location for the caller yet? No. Still unknown. The hairs on my arms rose. Unknown numbers usually meant blocked cell phones, but this didn't feel like that. I walked around the barn and looked out over the open field. The moon was brighter here, outlining the dry weeds and the old path leading toward the tree line. I listened, really listened, and that's when I caught it. A sound, faint, thin, somewhere between a whisper and a cry. It almost didn't sound human, more like a voice trapped underwater, muffled, stretched, drifting on the wind. Help! I spun toward the noise. My flashlight beam trembled across the weeds. The voice came again, farther off this time. Help me! The sound wasn't right. It echoed in a strange way, like bouncing off something that wasn't there. The words seemed too slow, too warped. My gut twisted. I'd heard people cry for help before. Real fear sounds rough, frantic. This sounded practiced, rehearsed, like someone trying to remember how a human voice should sound. I stepped forward, following the path into the field. But after 20 feet, the sound faded, gone completely. The silence felt wrong, like the night had swallowed the voice whole. I stayed another 10 minutes, double-checking everything. But finally, I had call it. No trespassers. No injured person. No sign of anything except that eerie echo. I reported the false alarm and headed back to the car, though unease scraped along my ribs. Back at the station, I mentioned the call to my supervisor, Lieutenant Marks. He was leaning back in his chair, rubbing his temples like always. Middle-aged guy, red cheeks, stomach you could rest a coffee cup on. Hatcher Farm, huh? He said with a chuckle. Heard those old stories already? What stories? Oh, you know. He waved his hand. The usual. Back in the day, folks said you could hear things out there. Screams, cries, weird noises. Places always had that reputation. I waited for him to explain more. He didn't. Instead, he leaned forward and gave me a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Don't worry. Hell, you'll get used to the noise. He didn't sound like he believed that. He sounded like someone trying to convince himself. 3 nights later, around 1:30 a.m., the call started again. Unit 4, caller reports screaming at Hatcher Farm. Unit 4, caller says they see someone running near the barn. Unit 4, caller states there's movement by the tree line. Every time I asked for details, dispatch gave the same answer, unknown caller. Every time I searched the property, I found nothing but old boards and moonlit grass. After the 4th call in a week, I began to wonder if someone was messing with me. Maybe a local kid hacked a phone system, or someone in the department was pulling a prank. But the tone of the calls didn't feel like a joke. The timing didn't feel random. And the voice I heard that first night, that wasn't a prank. I knew it wasn't. The sheriff's office didn't talk openly about missing persons. Small counties like ours rarely do. They don't want attention or media calls. But one quiet morning, when the station was nearly empty, I decided to dig deeper. I went into the old records room, a cramped space filled with dust and metal filing cabinets that screech when you open them. I found the logbooks dating back to the early 1980s. Most were full of the usual stuff. Trespassers, drunk driving, domestic disputes. But then I reached a section labeled 349 Sector, Incidents, and the tone shifted. There were reports of campers vanishing. Hunters who went missing somewhere near Hatcher Lake. Nighttime calls about strange lights or screams. People claiming they saw someone wander in the fields, but couldn't describe their face. The report stopped abruptly in the early 2000s. A thick red line was drawn across the page with the words, "No further investigations authorized." That got my attention. While I was still reading, the door behind me swung open. I nearly hit my head on the cabinet. It was Carter. Deputy Carter wasn't exactly warm. He was one of the older guys, must have been nearing retirement, gray in his beard, sun-weathered skin, a face carved by too many years in the heat. I hardly ever heard him raise his voice, and I never saw him smile. "What are you doing back here, Hale?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "Just looking through old logs," I said. No point lying. He could see the open drawer. Wanted to understand more about the 349 Sector. Carter stepped forward slowly, like his boots were too heavy. "Those cases are old." "I know. Dead and buried," he added. "Nothing you need to bother with." I didn't like the way he said it. Why were there so many missing people out there? He stared at me, long and hard. Then he closed the cabinet drawer with a sharp slam. "You're new," he said quietly. "So let me give you advice. Don't go digging into things that don't need digging." That sounded like a warning. I replied, "It is." The room felt colder. Carter's eyes had the same look I'd seen in people who'd stared down something they never forgot, a look I didn't yet understand. "Listen to me, Hale," he continued. "There are stories in this county that don't have endings. Don't try to write one." With that, he turned and walked out. I waited until his footsteps faded, then reopened the cabinet anyway. Whatever he was trying to protect me from, I needed to know. I wasn't doing this out of pride or stubbornness. It was fear, pure fear that something bad was happening out there, and we were ignoring it. A week later, around 2:10 a.m., I was back on patrol. The night was foggy, the kind where headlights look like they're underwater. As I drove past a road leading to Hatcher Farm, something caught my eye on the right side of the road. Footprints. I pulled over and stepped out with my flashlight. The prints led down toward the riverbank, fresh ones, deep in the sand. They looked barefoot, the size of an adult's foot. I followed them down the slope, the beam shaking slightly in my hand. The river moved slow and thick, its surface black under the fog. The prints continued for about 30 feet, and then they stopped, just like that. Mid-step, the next print never landed. My skin prickled from neck to spine. I circled the area 3 times to be sure, but there were no drag marks, no signs of someone jumping, no footprints leading back the way they came. It was as though the person had simply disappeared into thin air. A splash echoed upriver. I whipped around and aimed my light across the water. Nothing. Another splash. Closer now, but still nothing visible. I backed away slowly, keeping the beam trained on the river until I reached my car. This wasn't normal. None of it was. And ignoring it wasn't helping. Later that same night, as I drove deeper along 349, the fog began to thin. My nerves were still tight from the footprints. I wanted the shift to be over. The clock said I still had hours left. That's when I saw it again. The figure. Same shape. Same height. Same unnatural stillness. But this time it stood closer. Only 20 feet from the road, near the tree line. Close enough that I could make out the outline of its head, its arms, its long legs planted firmly in the grass. I slowed the car, heart hammering so hard I felt in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch at the sound of the engine. It was waiting, watching, not hiding this time. My hands gripped the wheel, so tightly my fingers went numb. I reached for my spotlight, flicked it on, and aimed it straight at the figure. The beam hit the trees, the grass, empty space. The figure was gone, just like before, completely gone. I didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. Something was happening in that part of the county, something that didn't fit into any report or training manual. And the calls, the voices, the footprints, the figure, they weren't separate things. They were steps, progressing, growing. And I knew, deep down, that whatever I was dealing with wasn't finished with me yet. Because the next night, someone else would try to warn me. And this time, I wouldn't be able to ignore it. After seeing that figure a second time, I didn't sleep for more than an hour or two each night. Even when I did drift off, I woke up feeling like something was standing just outside my bedroom door, listening to me breathe. I kept going back to those missing person reports in my head. Those campers, those hunters, all those cases with no answers. Something connected them. I could feel it. And whatever it was, I had seen it. The next day, I drove the same route along County Road 349, trying to make sense of what I'd experienced. I told myself I was being logical, but the truth was, I was searching for someone, anyone, who might know the history of that land. Someone who wasn't afraid of talking, like the deputies were. Some locals in small counties know more than the sheriff's office. They hear the rumors. They hold the secrets. They pass down the stories everyone else pretends not to believe. That's when I remembered something Carter had said weeks earlier, back when I first started patrolling the area. There's an old woman near the forest edge. Lives alone. Folks say she knows things. But best to leave her be. At the time, I'd laughed about it. Every town has a person like that. The one people whisper about but won't visit. But now, after everything I had seen, I didn't feel like laughing. So after my shift ended that afternoon, I drove toward the forest line, down a narrow dirt road I'd never traveled before. The road cut between tall pine trees that blocked most of the sun, leaving only thin rays of light reaching the ground. My tires kicked up clouds of dust as I followed a hand-carved sign pointing toward Eleanor's place. Her house appeared suddenly, like the woods had been hiding it until the last moment. A small wooden cabin with warped boards and a rusted tin roof. Half the porch rails were gone. A rocking chair sat beside the door, creaking back and forth in the breeze, even though the air was still. I stepped out of my car and walked slowly toward the cabin. The ground felt soft beneath my boots, too soft, like the soil had been disturbed recently. I scanned the yard and noticed animal bones hanging from thin strings in the trees. Not big ones, maybe raccoon or rabbit, but arranged a way that looked intentional. I knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. After a long pause, I heard slow footsteps. The door opened just an inch at first, then all the way, revealing a thin elderly woman with white hair pulled back into a low braid. Her skin looked sun-brown in line with age, but her eyes were sharp, brighter than I expected. "You must be the deputy," she said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes, ma'am," I answered. "Name's Hale." She studied me a little longer. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." I hesitated. She hadn't asked why I was there. She didn't look surprised to see me either. But I followed her inside anyway. Something about her felt honest, not safe, exactly, but honest. The inside of her cabin smelled like old cedar and dried herbs. The walls were covered in framed photos, black and white ones, faded ones, some so old you could barely make out the faces. A wood-burning stove crackled in the corner, filling the room with warm light. Eleanor sat in a chair by the stove and motioned for me to look around. "You're looking for answers," she said quietly, "about what's been happening on that road." I felt a chill. "You know about that?" She nodded. "I've lived by these woods longer than you've been alive. I know when they change. I know when they wake up." I swallowed. "I've seen someone out there. Or something. Twice now. Same shape. Same spot." "You won't get much sleep anymore," she said simply. Her words hit harder than I wanted them to. I walked closer to one of the photo walls. The picture showed families standing in front of farms, fishermen holding up big catfish, kids running barefoot through tall grass. But some of the older pictures, those made me pause. One showed a group of people gathered at the edge of the woods, all facing the trees, as if waiting for something to step out. Another showed a tall, blurry shape standing in a field. It was distorted, maybe damaged by time, but the height, the stance, it looked like the figure I'd seen. Eleanor's voice broke the silence. "The forest keeps memories." I turned toward her. "What do you mean?" She pointed at the trees outside the window. "These woods are older than anything out here. Older than the farms, older than the towns, older than all of us. They don't forget what happens in them. And some things," she paused, "some things don't leave, even when their bodies do." I felt my throat tighten. "You're talking about ghosts?" "No," she said firmly. "Worse." The cabin seemed to shrink around me. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. People around here had a name for it. The Hollow Man. My heartbeat stuttered. It was the first time anyone had given it a name. "What is it?" I asked. Eleanor's eyes clouded, as if she were looking back on something she wished she hadn't seen. "A shape that doesn't belong. A memory without a soul. It takes the form of those who died out here, but doesn't understand how to be them. It copies the outside, but inside," she shook her head, "inside it's empty." I remembered the figure's stiff posture, the way it didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even look human except for its shape. I asked her, "Has anyone seen it recently?" She nodded slowly. "It comes around every few years, when the land stirs, when the past gets restless. And from the way you're shaking, I'd say it's watching you now." I didn't like how calm she sounded. Before I could ask more, a loud crack came from outside, like a branch snapping under someone's weight. I stood up instinctively, reaching for the door. Eleanor's voice snapped like a whip. "Don't." I froze. I'd never heard that tone from an old woman before. Her eyes widened, not with fear exactly, but with warning. "You open that door," she whispered, "and you invite in." Another snap, then slow, deliberate steps circling the cabin. I felt the air shift, like something heavy was pressing against the walls. Eleanor gripped the arms of her chair. "It's looking for you. It followed the smell of your fear." I stepped away from the door, pulse hammering. "Should we call someone?" "No one can help you with this." Another crack. Closer. Almost right outside the window. I didn't breathe for what felt like a full minute. Then silence. Deep, unnatural silence. Eleanor waited another 5 minutes before she finally spoke. "You should leave now, before it comes back." I nodded. My legs felt weak as I walked toward the door. She followed behind me and touched my arm just as I reached for the handle. "You need to be careful," she said softly. "The Hollow Man doesn't hunt like a beast. It waits. It watches. It learns you." I swallowed hard. "Why me?" "You've been looking at the past," she said, "and the past is looking back." Those words sank deep into my chest, heavy and cold. I stepped outside. The yard looked exactly the same as before, but it felt different, like the shadows were thicker, the air heavier, the trees leaning in a little closer. I thanked her quickly and walked to my car, trying not to look anywhere except the driver's door. But as I started the engine, something caught my eye on the dirt road ahead. A silhouette, tall, motionless, leaning slightly to one side. It stood right in the path that led back to the main road. I froze, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The headlights hit the figure dead on, but I couldn't see details. Just that shape, that posture, so much like the one I'd seen twice before. For a moment, it didn't move. Then, slowly, it stepped aside of the road, allowing me pass. Not walking away, not turning, just stepping aside, like it knew I needed to leave. I hit the gas harder than I meant to. Gravel kicked up behind me as the cabin shrank in my rear view mirror. I didn't breathe again until I was back on the paved road. Even then, every few seconds I glanced at the mirror, expecting to see that silhouette keeping pace with me. By the time I got home, I was mentally drained. I walked straight to my bedroom, too tired to eat or shower. But even exhaustion couldn't stop my brain from replaying Eleanor's words. The forest keeps memories. Some people never leave it. The hollow man takes their shape. I collapsed into bed, hoping sleep would pull me away from all of it. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke to a sound that cut through the darkness like a blade. 3 soft taps on my window. Tap, tap, tap. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, afraid to even turn my head toward the glass. My breath shook in my chest. Then silence, thick and complete. I didn't look outside. I couldn't, but I knew. Deep down, something had stood there, something that had followed me home. And when morning came, I'd realized that the knocking was only the beginning, because the past had more to show me. After the knocking on my window that night, I didn't sleep again. I lay there until sunrise, staring at the thin curtain and waiting for another tap, another sign that something stood outside waiting for me. But nothing else happened. The room stayed quiet. Still, that silence didn't feel comforting. It felt like something holding its breath. When the sun finally came up, I got out of bed with decision already forming in my mind. I couldn't keep pretending this was nothing. I couldn't keep showing up for patrol, hoping the figure wouldn't appear again. Whatever was happening out there wasn't random, and if I wanted answers, I had to go deeper. So the next day, after I clocked out from a long, uneasy shift, I drove straight to the county archives building, a squat concrete structure behind the courthouse that always smelled like dust and mildew. Most deputies avoided it unless they needed paperwork. For me, it felt like the only place left where the truth might be hiding. The archive clerk barely looked up when I walked in. That was fine. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. I went to the oldest section of the records and pulled open drawers stiff with age. The folders inside were yellowed and brittle at the corners. I flipped through case files and land deeds, anything that mentioned Hatcher Lake or County Road 349. Nothing stood out at first. Just old farm tax records, fishing permits, property transfers. Then I found a thin file crammed between 2 thicker ones. No label, just a date written in pencil, 1954. I opened it carefully. Inside were 3 newspaper clippings, a police summary, and 2 photographs. The first clipping was from a local paper called the Sewanee Herald, dated September 1954. The headline read, "Local religious group establishes community near Hatcher Lake." The article described a small commune led by a man named Elias Marrow. He preached something about the forest being a sacred doorway, a place where the past and future touched. The article made him sound eccentric but harmless, just another strange religious leader trying to build a quiet life with his followers. But the second clipping, dated only 3 months later, told a darker story. 10 members of Hatcher Lake commune vanished overnight. Authorities never found evidence of violence. No bodies. No signs of a struggle. The buildings were left as if the people had stepped out for a moment and never returned. The article said the surviving members, only 3 of them, claimed the missing were taken during a nighttime ritual. It didn't explain what that meant. The final clipping was short, almost an afterthought. Property abandoned after investigation. Area considered unsafe. I leaned back in the chair, trying to absorb it. A whole group of people disappearing in one night? Why had no one mentioned it? Why wasn't it common knowledge? Something nudged at the back of my mind. A memory, faint and dusty. My grandmother telling me stories when I was a kid. Stories about her brother who never came home. My family never spoke his name out loud. I never knew the full story. My heartbeat picked up. I opened the police summary next. Most of it was vague, but the list of missing members made my hands freeze. John Hale, age 24. Last seen the evening of December 3rd. My great-uncle. I stared at the name for a long time. It felt like the room narrowed around me. I read the line again, then a third time, as if it might change. My great-uncle vanished at Hatcher Lake, in the same woods I patrolled every night. The same woods where the figure stood, where the screams came from, where the footprints ended mid-step. I didn't know how I felt, shaken, confused, scared, angry. Maybe all of it. But one thought kept repeating in my head. This isn't a coincidence. I gathered the files and photos and brought them to the front desk to make copies. My hands shook as a machine hummed. I felt watched, even in a brightly lit government building. When the copies finished, I stuffed them into a manila folder and drove straight to the station. That's where I found Carter. He was sitting in the parking lot, smoking a cigarette, staring at nothing. He looked older than usual, tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. I walked up to him and held out the folder. "We need to talk," I said. He took one look at the papers and sighed. "You went digging?" "I had to," I replied. "You knew about the commune, didn't you?" He nodded once. "Everyone who's been here long enough knows pieces of it. We just don't talk about it." "Why?" "Because talking makes things worse." I sat on the hood of my car and waited. Eventually, he gave in. "Back in the 80s, he said, there were deputies assigned to patrol that sector. Good men, tough men. But after a while, they refused. So they kept seeing people who shouldn't be there." "You mean trespassers?" He shook his head. "Copies." A cold shiver ran up my spine. "Copies of who?" "Loved ones. Dead relatives. People who went missing years earlier. They'd appear in the woods or near the dried lake, at night, standing still, just staring, like someone trying to remember how to be human. I couldn't breathe for a moment. "You think that's what I saw?" "Doesn't matter what I think," Carter said. "What matters is you stop dealing with it alone." For the first time since this all began, I felt something like relief. Not comfort, just the sense that someone else believed me. "What do we do?" I asked. Carter crushed a cigarette under his boot. "We go to where it started." That evening, after the sun dipped low and the woods turned dark and heavy, we drove down a narrow dirt path off an old service road. The map from the commune files showed a small building deep in the woods, marked only as Meeting Shack. Carter led the way, his flashlight cutting through the dense brush. The deeper we walked, the quieter the woods became. No crickets, no birds, not even wind, like the forest itself was listening. After about 20 minutes, the shack appeared through the trees. It was small, barely big enough for 5 people. The wood was rotted, the roof sagging, but the structure was still standing. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. "This was theirs," Carter said, "where Merrill held his meetings." I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me. Old rot mixed with something sharp, like burned paper. Inside, the floor was covered in fallen leaves and broken boards. Symbols were carved into the walls. Circles, lines, shapes that reminded me of the markings I'd seen in the commune photos. In the corner sat a small wooden crate. Inside were notebooks, old journals with cracked bindings and yellow pages. I picked one up. The handwriting inside was messy, uneven. I flipped through pages describing nighttime rituals, chants, and something the leader called the awakening of the door. He believed the forest was alive, that it remembered everything, that it could bring back what was lost, or take what it wanted. Carter found a rolled-up piece of paper wedged behind a loose board. Together we unrolled it on the floor. It was a map, hand-drawn, rough but clear enough to follow. It showed the shack, the old Hatcher farm, the dried lake, and then a path leading deeper into the woods toward a place marked with a single word, reflection. I didn't like the sound of that. Neither did Carter. Before we could discuss it, we heard something outside. A footstep. Slow. Deliberate. Then another. And another. Carter lifted his flashlight, but the beam shook in his hand. The shack had no windows, so we couldn't see out. But whatever was walking around the building wasn't trying to hide. Each step was steady, careful, circling us. I whispered, "Maybe it's an animal." He whispered back, "No animal walks like that." The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Silence. Thick, crushing silence. Carter motioned for me to stay behind him. He touched the door lightly, as if expecting someone to push back from the other side. Nothing happened. After a minute of waiting in that unbearable quiet, he nudged the door open an inch, then another. Finally, he stepped outside. I followed right behind him. No one was there, but something was wrong. Very wrong. I turned toward the clearing where we had parked the patrol car, and I stopped breathing. The car had moved. It now sat at an angle, several feet away from where we parked it. The tires left drag marks in the dirt, as if something had pulled it sideways. Not pushed, not driven. Dragged. Carter's face went pale. We were only in there 5 minutes. I walked toward the car, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. Every inch of me felt watched, observed, like something had stepped just out of sight, waiting for us to look away again. I opened the driver's door. Nothing seemed disturbed inside, but the shift was unmistakable. Something with strength, serious strength, had moved a 2-ton vehicle like it was nothing. Carter whispered, "We're leaving. Now." I didn't argue. We got in the car, locked the doors, and backed down the narrow dirt path as fast as we could without hitting a tree. The whole way out, my eyes stayed glued to the rearview mirror, waiting for that tall figure to step into the road again. But it didn't. Not that night. When I finally reached home, I sat in the driveway for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my breathing. But the shaking wouldn't stop. This wasn't just strange calls or weird shadows anymore. This was bigger, older than anything I'd imagined. And now that I knew what the commune believed, now that I knew my own bloodline was tangled up in this, the woods felt closer. The past felt awake. I went to bed knowing one thing for certain. The Hollow Man hadn't shown itself for the last time. And what came next would take someone from us for good. Carter was right. Someone was going to be taken. I just didn't know it would be him. After the night at the shack, the footsteps outside, the patrol car dragged across the clearing. Things at the station changed, even though nobody said anything out loud. Carter and I didn't talk much in front of the others, but there was an understanding between us now. We'd seen too much to pretend it was just strange activity or kids messing around. The woods were involved. The past was involved. And whatever was inside those trees had started paying attention. About a week after we found the shack, a storm rolled in. Not the quick afternoon kind that blows over in an hour. This one was mean and slow, with black clouds stacking over the pine line, and the air thick enough to chew. The forecast called for heavy rain, thunder, and possible flooding along the river. Of course, that meant more patrols. I was assigned to one side of the county, closer to town and the main roads. Carter got the 349 sector and the areas around the old Hatcher Farm and Hatcher Lake. When I saw his assignment on the whiteboard, something twisted in my chest. "You sure you're okay with that?" I asked him quietly. He shrugged and pulled his rain jacket tighter around his shoulders. "Someone's got to cover it." "You know what I mean." He studied me for a moment. The station lights reflected in his tired eyes. "We can't act scared of a patrol route," he said. "If we do, it's already won." I didn't like that he used the word "it," but I understood. The storm hit hard around 10 that night. Rain hammered the windshield like handfuls of thrown gravel. Lightning flashed in the distance, turning the tree line into a jagged black wall. My radio crackled with routine traffic. Reports of downed branches, a fender bender near town, a power line issue. Carter checked in every so often. Unit 3, passing Hatcher Farm. Roads flooding in spots, but still passable. Unit 3 near the old boat ramp. No civilians in sight. His voice sounded steady. Calm, the same way it always did. Around midnight, The rain came down even harder. Thunder rolled nonstop, so loud it shook my rearview mirror. The darkness felt thicker, as if the sky itself was pressing down on the earth. Then Carter's voice came through again. Only this time, it sounded different. "Dispatch, Unit 3, he said, a little breathless. "I've got something in the road ahead. Looks like a person. Might be injured. I'm near the dried lake bed, east side." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Copy, Unit 3, dispatch answered. Do you need backup?" There was a pause. "Negative for now," Carter replied. "Let me make contact first." Lightning flashed, and for a second the inside of my patrol car was white. I swallowed hard. I should have offered to go. I should have said I was close enough. But I hesitated. Maybe a part of me hoped it was nothing. Maybe I was afraid. I already knew what he'd found. A minute passed. Then another. No follow-up from Carter. "Unit 3, status check. Dispatch called. Do you still have contact?" Silence. I turned my car toward 349 without waiting for orders. "Unit 3, this is dispatch. Please respond." Static. My heart started beating faster. I grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I'm heading toward Carter's last known location." "Copy, Unit 4. Last ping was near the eastern side of Hatcher Lake Bed. Use caution." The rain blurred everything. I drove faster than I should have. Wipers doing little to clear the windshield. Trees whipped by in shadowy streaks as I pushed deeper into the dark. Halfway there, the radio crackled again. At first, I thought it was just static. Then I picked out words buried in the noise. "Hale, you there?" Carter's voice, strained, almost drowned by interference. I grabbed the mic. "Carter, it's Hale. Where are you? What's happening?" More crackling. Then his voice low and shaking. "It's wearing." The transmission cut, then returned in a burst of sharp static. My face. Every hair on my body stood on end. I felt cold all over, despite the muggy heat of the storm. "Say again." I yelled. "Carter, repeat that. What's wearing your face?" But the radio only hissed back at me. I floored it. When I finally reached a stretch of dirt road near the lake bed, my headlights hit Carter's patrol car sitting sideways, half on the road and half in the mud. The driver's door was open, rain pouring into the seat, radio still crackling softly with dead noise. "Carter," I shouted, stepping out into ankle-deep water. The storm was a living thing, roaring in my ears. Lightning flashed, lighting up the empty road, the skeletal remains of the lake, the line of black trees watching from the distance. No Carter. I checked inside his car. The engine was still running. His flashlight lay on the passenger seat. The radio handset dangled, swinging gently as the wind pushed at the door. I followed his footprints in the mud, illuminated in bursts whenever lightning sliced the sky. They led a few yards down the road, then veered off toward the lake bed. My boots sank into the muck as I followed, rain soaking through my uniform. I called his name over and over, my voice swallowed by the storm. "Carter, where are you?" No answer. The prints got deeper as they approached the edge of the dried lake. Then, suddenly, they became a long, dark drag mark, as if something had taken hold of him and pulled. The mark cut through the mud in a straight line, heading toward the center of the empty lake bed, but it faded into nothing halfway there, washed out by running water and loose soil. No body, no drop weapon, no sign of a struggle other than that single, awful drag mark. Search teams came out later. More deputies, volunteers, K-9 units, even a helicopter when the weather allowed. They searched the lake bed, the woods, the roads. Hours turned into a full day. Then another. The only thing they found was Carter's badge, half buried in the mud near where the drag mark started. No one said out loud, but we all thought it. Something took him. And whatever it was, it didn't want to leave proof. The official story, written up later in the reports, called it a probable drowning during severe weather. They said he might have slipped, hit his head, and been carried off by floodwater into the river. But I'd seen that dry lake. There was no deep water there. Just mud, dirt, and something that remembered every step. I knew the truth, or at least part of it. The Hollow Man had changed its mind. It wasn't just watching us anymore. It was choosing. 2 days after Carter vanished, my phone rang at home. I almost didn't answer. I'd been sitting in the dark, TV off, lights off, just listening to the house creak and the wind move outside. The sound of phone startled me so badly, I dropped the remote. I glanced at the caller ID. Unknown number. My chest tightened. I thought of the calls about screams at Hatcher Farm, the way they showed up as unknown caller in the system. I answered anyway. Hello? A familiar voice came through. Old. Calm. A little shaky. Jacob, Miss Eleanor said. You need to come see me. My grip tightened. Eleanor, how did you get my number? I hear things, she replied. And you're running out of time. A chill slid down my spine. What does that mean? It took your friend, she said softly. And now it wants you. The room seemed to tilt. I sank onto the arm of the couch, holding the phone in my ear like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. You're talking about the Hollow Man. I whispered. Yes. My voice cracked. It wore his face. He said so over the radio, right before he disappeared. Eleanor was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, there was a sadness in her tone I hadn't heard before. The forest keeps memories, she said. You remember what I told you, but I didn't tell you all of it. Then tell me now. People who die in those woods or near the lake, sometimes they don't move on, she said. They become echoes, trap pieces, not whole spirits, but impressions, leftover shadows of who they were. I thought of my great-uncle's name in that old file, of the missing commune members, of all those hunters and campers who never came home. My great-uncle, I said slowly, John Hale, he vanished there, didn't he? Yes, she replied, and I am sorry, Jacob. Your blood has been tied to that ground longer than you've known. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The Hollow Man feeds on those echoes, she went on. It wraps itself in them, their shapes, their voices. It uses them like bait to pull the living closer, to make you follow. So when someone hears a loved one out there, I began. It isn't kindness, she finished. It's a trap. My stomach twisted. Carter heard someone. I said, he must have. Someone in the road. Someone who looked like I swallowed. Like him. Or someone he knew. Or someone it knew would matter to him, Eleanor said. It learns you. It listens. It waits. My mind raced with memories, those unknown calls, the screams in the distance, the figure standing at the tree line, still and patient. What do I do? I asked, how do I stop it? You can't stop it, she said, but you might be able to break its hold, or at least refuse what it's offering. Offering. I repeated, it's killing people. Taking them, she corrected, into itself, into the memory it's trying to complete. Lightning flashed outside my window, though the storm had already passed hours ago. I stood and looked out into the dark yard, my reflection faint in the glass. I have to go back to the woods, don't I? I said quietly. Yes, Eleanor replied. But be careful, Jacob. When it calls to you, it won't always wear a stranger's face. The line went dead. She had hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, fully dressed, my boots still on, listening. Every creak, every rustle outside, every car passing down the road. I heard it all. Around 2 a.m., a sound cut through the quiet. A voice. Outside, right in front of my house. Hail, it shouted. Hey, you up? My heart lurched. It was Carter's voice. I stood slowly, legs unsteady. I walked the front window and moved the curtain just an inch, peeking out at the road. The streetlight cast a dull yellow cone over the asphalt. No one was there. Hail! The voice called again, closer now. I need a lift, man. Radio's down. The sound came from just beyond the light, like he was standing in the dark where my eyes couldn't quite reach. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to open the door, to run out there, to help my friend. But Eleanor's words echoed louder. It uses them like bait. My hand shook as I stepped away from the window. I forced myself to walk to the back of the house instead, to look out over the small yard and the weathered wooden fence. The voice came again, but this time it sounded wrong, stretched as if replayed from a broken recording. "Hale, help me." I stared at the fence. Something moved behind it, a tall shape, just visible over the top. Too tall to be Carter. Too tall to be any normal man. The head tilted slowly, like a curious animal that didn't quite understand what it was looking at. My breath caught in my throat. The backyard light flicked on with a soft hum, triggered by the motion sensor. By the time the glow washed over grass, the shape was gone. The yard was empty. I was done pretending this was something that would go away on its own. Done hoping the department's reports and excuses could cover it up. Done believing I could keep my distance and stay safe. Carter was gone. My family's past was tied to those woods. And now whatever lived in them knew my name, my house, my fear. I couldn't keep running from it. I had to go back. Back to the shack. Back to the map. Back to the place marked Reflection. Because if the Hollow Man wanted me, then the next move was mine. And the forest was waiting. The forest didn't make me wait long. Once I knew where the map pointed, once I knew what reflection meant, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd be making coffee or sitting at a red light, and my mind would drift back to that hand-drawn word, circled like a wound. I saw Carter's drag mark in the mud every time I closed my eyes. I saw my great-uncle's name on that yellowed page. I heard the Hollow Man using Carter's voice outside my house. It wanted me in those woods. Fine. I was going to meet it there. I chose a day off so nobody at the station would see me leaving in uniform and start asking questions. I wore jeans, a dark shirt, and my old boots. Still brought my service pistol. Habit, fear, both. I didn't know if a bullet could stop something like the Hollow Man, but empty hands would feel worse. On the kitchen table, I laid out everything I was taking, like I was checking off a list for a trip I never want to take. Flashlight, spare batteries, matches, a small can of gas, the copied commune pages, the brittle journals from the shack, and that map. In daylight, the map looked uglier. The lines weren't just paths. They looked like scratches dug into the paper, looping around symbols and short notes in shaky ink. The trail from the shack to Reflection twisted in a way that made my eyes hurt if I followed it too long. Still, my gut knew this was where it all started, where it all kept bleeding through. I folded the map and slid it into my jacket. My hands didn't feel steady. The drive out to County Road 349 felt different now. No more pretending it was just a quiet sector. The sky was already dimming, clouds turning purple as the sun sank behind the trees. Shadow gathered in the ditches and under the pines like water filling low places. When I pulled onto the narrow dirt turnoff, my stomach dropped. This was the same way Carter and I had gone before the shack, before the footsteps, before the car moved. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the wheel. No radio, no backup. No one knew where I was going. I thought of calling Miss Eleanor, but what could she do from that little cabin? After a minute, I grabbed the journals, the map, the gas can, and stepped out. I locked the car out of habit. Even though a door lock wasn't going to stop whatever lived in these trees. The air under the branches felt heavier than the road behind me. Cooler, too, like I had stepped into a different room of the world. The path was barely a path, just a place where the ground was a little more worn and the brush bent slightly, like it had been pushed aside many times by people who didn't want to leave signs they'd been there. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut a white tunnel through the dim and turned the closest trees into gray pillars. The rest of the woods pressed in beyond that light, watching. My boots sank into soft ground as I walked. The deeper I went, the wetter the soil became. Water seeped up around each step, black and cold, soaking through the edges of my socks. The smell of mud and old water rose around me, mixed with pine sap and something sour and old underneath. Mosquitoes buzzed near my ears, but not as many as there should have been. No bird calls, no frogs. Just a wet pool of mud and the soft brush of branches against my jacket. I crossed a shallow stretch of swamp on old boards someone laid down before I was born. They bowed under my weight and creaked like they might crack at any second. Dark water sat on either side, still and thick and full of rotting leaves. Every now and then I had to stop and check the map, crouch and hold the paper in the flashlight beam. I didn't like how the drawn lines seemed to bend if I stared too long, like they wanted to slide somewhere else. I forced myself to follow the marks, not the feeling. Time blurred out there. I don't know how long I walked. It felt like the woods were stretching the trail, lengthening it with every step. My back ached. My calves burned. My mind kept whispering that I could still turn back. Go home. Pretend nothing else happened. But there was nowhere to go back to that didn't have a hollow man waiting at the edge. Finally, the trees began to thin. I stepped out into a clearing, and every part of me went tight. The place felt wrong the instant I saw it. The trees formed a rough ring, but the ground inside that ring was bare. No grass. No weeds. Just pale dirt, packed hard, like the earth had been beaten flat over and over. In the center, a wide pit yawned, a dark mouth and ground. Around it stood a circle of stone pillars, no taller than my chest, leaning slightly inward. Symbols were carved into them, the same shapes I had seen on the shack walls and in the commune notes. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw dried wax and old drips and dark stains that could have been anything but didn't feel like anything good. This was their place, the ritual site. I walked closer, my heart pounding hard enough that I could feel in my throat. The air here was colder than the woods around it. Thicker, too, like it had weight. Breathing felt like pulling air through cloth. Then I noticed something else. A hum. At first, I thought it was my ears ringing from the quiet. But no, this had a rhythm. Low and steady, not quite sound, more like pressure. It pressed on my chest and at the sides of my head, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I swallowed, my mouth dry. Hello. My voice sounded small. The hum deepened, like the clearing was clearing its throat. Then I heard it. Jacob. The voice came from behind me. I spun around, flashlight swinging across tree trunks and shadows. Nothing moved. No one was there. Jacob. It said again, this time from my left. Carter. He sounded close. Casual. The way he'd sound walking up behind me in the station parking lot. My stomach dropped. Over here, he called, a hint of a laugh in his tone. You're slow, kid. Thought you wanted answers. I swept the light across the edge of the trees. Empty. My foot took one step in that direction before I could stop it. Then another voice slid in, like water into a crack. Son. My body went cold. It was my father's voice. The same low drawl I heard over dinner tables and in the garage, teaching me how to hold a wrench. I hadn't heard it since the night we yelled at each other, and he told me to get out if I didn't like his rules. He died before he could fix that. Hearing him now felt like a knife. I'm proud of you, Jacob, he said, from somewhere near the pit. You're facing it. You're not running like I did. My eyes burned. My chest ached. I took another step, close to the pit, as if pulled by a rope around my ribs. Then my grandmother's voice joined in, shaky, from some corner of the dark. Our Johnny's still out there, she whispered. He needs you. The hum rolled under all of it, heavier now, and the hair on my arm stood up. I looked down into the pit. The darkness wasn't just shadow. It was thick like tar, like something that had pooled there and refused to move. As I watched, it began to rise. Slowly. The dark poured upward, pulling together into a column that took on shape the way mist takes on form in headlights. Shoulders formed. A head. Long arms that seemed too narrow. It climbed out of the hole without grabbing the edge, without shifting its weight. It just rose like gravity forgot it. It stepped onto the packed dirt, and my flashlight found its face. I stopped breathing. It was my great-uncle, Johnny Hale, the same face from the old faded photo my grandmother kept in a tin box. Same jawline, same mouth, same eyes. His hair curled at the ends. He wore clothes from another time, shirt tucked into high pants, cuffs dark with damp. Jacob, he said, smiling softly, you look like your daddy. For one stupid, aching second, I wanted to believe it was him. I wanted that more than anything. The part of me that grew up on half-told stories screamed that he was real, that he was here, that the woods had given him back. Then I saw what was wrong. His eyes didn't blink. Not once. The smile didn't change shape, not even when he spoke. It sat on his face like it had been glued there. And behind those familiar features, there was nothing. No warmth. No flicker of real recognition. Just a stillness that made my skin crawl. "You came," he said. His voice sounded close, but there was a faint echo under it, as if it had been recorded in a metal room. "Been waiting on you, boy." "I don't know you," I whispered. "You're dead." For a moment, the face rippled, the skin stretched long, and then snapped back like something underneath it had shifted wrong. His shoulders lengthened too far, then shrank like the shape didn't fit right. "Nothing's dead here," it said, and now there was a thread of Carter's voice running through the words. "Not if someone remembers." Pain pressed behind my eyes. Images flashed without warning. Carter laughing in the break room, my father's back as he walked away, my grandmother crying in the kitchen, the drag mark in the mud, the shack, Miss Eleanor's warning eyes. They came fast and sharp, one on top of another, as if someone was flipping through my life like pages. The thing tilted its head, fascinated. "You carry so much," it said. "You scatter little pieces of yourself all through my woods. I only pick them up. I only wear what you leave behind." The hum inside the clearing rose, a low vibration that made my teeth hurt. My knees felt weak. "If you give them to me," it said softly, and now my father's tone slid into the sound, gentle and proud. "You won't have to feel this way. No more regret. No more blame. Let me hold it for you. Let me be full." For a heartbeat, the offer sounded kind. I could see it. No more waking at night hearing Carter's last call. No more thinking about the men who vanished under my watch, or the fight with my father that never got fixed. The hollow man wanted all of that. My pain, my history, my connections. If I let it take those, what would be left? I looked down at my hands. In one hand, I still held one of the journals. In the other, the folded map dug into my palm. Words, lines, rituals. The written memory of everything the commune had done to open this place. They had fed it. Maybe I could starve it. My fingers moved on their own, reaching into my bag for the small can of gas. When I pulled it out, the hollow man's borrowed face tightened. The smile tore at the edges before snapping back. "What are you doing?" it asked. My father's voice came out cracked now, almost pleading. "Son, don't throw away what they gave you. Don't burn their way." My throat closed. Tears stung my eyes. It knew exactly where to hit me. I uncapped the can anyway. The sharp smell of gasoline cut through the damp, heavy air. I poured it over the journal and the map. The paper darkened, stuck together, dripped. The hum stuttered. The voices warped. "Please," my grandmother's voice said, but now it came from that wrong mouth. "Don't burn Johnny's path. Don't shut him out." My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the can. Every part of me wanted to stop, to listen, to believe. "It's not them," I told myself. Over and over, like a prayer. It has never been them. With my free hand, I fumbled a match from the box. The stick almost slid from my damp fingers, but I held on and dragged it across the rough strip. It flared. The tiny flame felt fragile in all that dark, but it was still light, still real. I dropped it onto the soaked paper. For a split second, nothing happened. Then fire took. Flame raced across the pages in a bright, hungry rush. The journal curled in on itself, the map blackening at the edges. Orange and gold light exploded upward, throwing sharp, jerking shadows across the stones in the pit and the tall figure standing in front of me. The hollow man staggered back like I had shoved it, its face convulsed. My great uncle's features stretched and tore and melted into my father's, then into Carter's, then into strangers' faces I had never seen. For a moment, it had no face at all, just smooth skin and hollows where eyes should be. "Stop," it screamed. The sound was made of many voices layered on top of each other, all slightly out of time. "You're breaking it. You're breaking the door." The pressure in my skull eased. The constant pulling at my memories loosened, like fingers slipping off the pages of a book. The symbols on the pillars seemed to shift in the firelight, their lines coming undone. The hollow man reached toward the flames, its arms too long, fingers stretched like they were made of string. So many pieces, it whispered. Don't take them away. I need them. I need to be whole. A hard gust of wind rushed through the clearing, feeding the fire. Sparks leapt off the burning papers and dropped onto a dry ring of brush near the pit. Flames jumped from twig to twig, racing in a circle along the edge. Heat washed over my face. Smoke stung my eyes. The thing shrieked again, a thin, empty sound that didn't belong to any living throat. It lurched back toward the pit as if trying to sink into the darkness again. But the fire ringed the hole now, light pushing down its sides. For the first time since it rose, the hollow man looked unsure. Its body flickered at the edges, like it was trying to hold itself together and losing. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and ran. Branches grabbed at my arms and face. Roots scraped my boots. The woods screamed behind me, the hum breaking apart into sharp, scattered echoes. Voices chased me between the trees. Carter, my father, my grandmother, strangers, all of them calling my name, begging, accusing. Come back. You owe us. You can't leave us here. I ran harder. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they might give out, but fear kept them moving. Twice I stumbled, my hands slapping into mud, but I pushed myself back up and kept going. Little by little, the voices thinned. The hum faded from a roar to a low vibration, to almost nothing. By the time I burst out of the tree line and stumbled into the narrow strip of dirt where my car waited, the sky had begun to lighten. A pale gray washed over the horizon. A thin line of pink touched the tops of the trees. Birds called somewhere far off. Real birds with real bodies, making real sound. I leaned against the car, bending over, dragging air into my chest like I had been underwater. My hands shook. My clothes were streaked with mud. My skin smelled like smoke and swamp and gasoline. Behind me, the woods stood quiet and dark. The voices were still there. But now they were faint, pushed far back, like sounds heard down a long concrete tunnel. If I strained, I could still hear my name whispered somewhere in that distance. I had heard it. I could feel that in my bones. I had burned its paper trail, scorched the place where it had been fed all those years. Maybe I had closed part of whatever door the commune forced open. But as the first real light of morning slid across the tops of the pines, one thing settled in my gut. The hollow man still knew me. And even with its rituals turned to ash and its clearing scarred by fire, it still held pieces of me I might never fully get back. When I stumbled out of the woods that morning, covered in mud and ash, I thought I'd left something behind. Not the whole thing, not the hollow man entirely, but some part of its power, its reach. The fire felt like a line drawn in the dirt, a boundary between then and now. But boundaries don't last long in Suwannee County, and nothing stays buried in those woods for long. The first sign that things weren't done with me came before I even pulled into town. As I drove down the quiet Tulane Road, the early morning light washing pale over the fields, I saw an old pickup heading the opposite way. The man behind the wheel slowed when he saw me. He stared through his windshield like he knew something had changed. When I got gas at the station, the clerk, someone I'd talked to 100 times before, paused mid-sentence when she saw my face. "You all right, deputy?" she asked, though I wasn't a deputy anymore. Her tone had changed. Not scared, exactly, but careful. Fine, I told her, even though I knew I didn't look fine. I looked like something had walked across my grave. As I walked back to my car, an older man filling his tank leaned slightly away from me, as if he knew something had followed me out of the woods. People slip into that sort of distance without thinking. They feel things before they understand them. Back at the sheriff's office, things felt worse. 2 days after Carter vanished, they made a formal announcement. No press release. No town meeting. Just a short internal memo. Deputy Carter, presumed drowned during heavy storm conditions. Case closed pending further evidence. Drowned. A man who had patrolled those woods for 20 years. A man who had survived hurricanes, floods, fights, and God knows what else. A man who vanished on dry land that had no deep water to drown in. They knew it didn't make sense. And they didn't care. They wanted it closed. They wanted it quiet. And they wanted me to shut up about it. When I tried to push back, asked about the drag mark, asked about the radio call, asked about the commune, my supervisor gave me the kind of tired look people use when they have already decided who the problem is. "Hail," he said, "take some personal time. Clear your head." That was it. End the conversation. After that, they stopped calling me in, stopped checking in, stopped asking anything at all. The department turned cold around me, like a body rejecting something it didn't want to keep inside. And then one morning, driving past Eleanor's dirt road, I slowed and noticed something wrong. An empty space where a cabin should have been. Her house, her leaning porch, her bone charms, her life, was gone. Not torn down in the sense of construction crews and neat stacks of lumber. No, this looked like someone had packed up in a single night. The wind chimes were gone. The rocking chair, the photos inside, everything. A bare patch of earth and dead leaves sat where her cabin had been. I stepped out of my truck, walked into the space where her living room once stood, and felt nothing but hollow quiet. No note, no sign, no footprints but mine. She didn't move away. She disappeared. Just removed herself from the world like she knew something was coming. Maybe she did. After she left, the county felt smaller. The woods felt closer. I tried to go back to normal life. I really did. I went through the motions, paid bills, bought groceries, nodded at neighbors, slept with the lights off when I could manage it. But there were moments, little moments, that pulled me right back to that clearing. One afternoon in my backyard, while taking out the trash, I caught a glimpse of something behind the fence. A long shadow stretched across the ground even though the sun was overhead, stretching too far for any person. When I blinked, it was gone. Other times, when I closed the bathroom mirror, I saw someone behind me for a split second. Someone familiar and unfamiliar all at once. My great-uncle's shape, my father's posture, a piece of Carter's silhouette. Like the hollow man was still trying on parts of me. But the worst moments came at night. The first time, I told myself it was my imagination. The second time, maybe the wind. But by the third night, I couldn't pretend. Always around 2 a.m. Always soft. Always deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. 3 knuckles against glass. My room would go cold. The air would thicken. And I would lie frozen on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening for a breath on the other side of the window. Some nights, I swore I heard it. A quiet, shaky inhale, like someone learning how to breathe. Every time, I felt the same impossible mix of dread and recognition. Like a friend calling your name in a voice that isn't theirs. I never opened the curtain, never looked outside. I didn't want to see what face it was learning to wear now. I knew what Eleanor had said. Burning the journals and the map had hurt it. Broken something. But breaking isn't the same as destroying. Some memories don't die. Some just wait for a quiet night to visit again. I haven't gone back into the woods. Not since that morning when I ran until the sun touched the trees. But I know the hollow man is still out there. Maybe weaker. Maybe slower. But not gone. I can feel it. In the way dogs in my neighborhood bark at the tree line twice as long as they used to. In the way the wind sometimes carries a voice that sounds almost like Carter, but not quite. In the way I still dream of that clearing, firelight flickering on stone pillars, and a hollow man's face tearing apart and reforming in the glow. It wants to be whole. It wants to be full. And it needs memories to shape itself. My memories. Carter's memories. My great-uncle's. Yours, maybe, if you ever walk close enough to the place the commune opened. I'm telling all of this now, not because it makes me feel brave, or because I think people will believe me, or because I expect anyone to fix what's been happening in those woods. I'm telling it because you need to know that not everything in our world breaks the way it's supposed to. Some things fracture and keep moving. Some things fade but don't disappear. Some things live in the cracks between what we believe and what we fear. And if the woods of Sewanee County really keep memories, if the forest really holds on to lives and faces and voices that fall into it, Then how long until another one remembers me? Or worse, how long until it finishes learning my face? I wish this was a kind of story with a clean ending, where the monster burns, the ghosts rest, and the woods fall silent again. But this is a kind of story where silence isn't safety. It's a warning. So if you ever find yourself driving alone down an empty Florida road and you see someone standing by the tree line, not moving, not breathing, not right, don't stop. Don't call out. Don't let it hear your voice. Because some memories don't want to be forgotten, and some will follow you home just to make sure they last.